That patent is mine now. You should be grateful we let you stay this long.
There's no need to be grateful when ownership is just an illusion. Reality will soon correct you. Just wait a few more hours.
The projector was still humming when my access badge blinked from green to red. No warning, no discussion, just a quiet electronic denial, right in the middle of a board presentation I had built myself. I'm Chase Warren, 47 years old, and in less than 5 minutes, I watched the CEO's son take credit for 19 years of my work, Evan Caldwell. The CEO's 30-year-old son didn't even look at me when he said it. He straightened his cufflinks, glanced at the board, and announced it like a scheduling update. Effective immediately, the Helix patent portfolio will be transferred to Caldwell Industries. Chase Warren is no longer employed here. Helix wasn't just a patent, it was a layered security architecture I'd designed line by line, tested through defense audits, and refined across 4 administrations. It protected logistics systems, financial clearing networks, and critical infrastructure, valued internally at $1.9 billion. And now, it was being taken publicly, casually by someone who had never written a single line of code. No one spoke, not the CFO, not the legal counsel who'd helped draft my original agreements years ago, not the engineers whose careers I had personally sponsored. Silence is a language in corporate rooms, and I understood exactly what it meant. I closed my laptop. Evan finally looked at me then, probably expecting anger, or begging, or a scene instead. I asked one question: did you read subsection 17, paragraph 4 before you approved that transfer? The company's chief legal officer suddenly found his paperwork fascinating. Evan frowned. "This is handled," he said. I nodded once, signed the termination form they slid across the table, and stood at the door. I paused. "Enjoy today," I said calmly. "Most systems don't fail loudly. They fail at sunrise." He smirked. None of them understood what I meant. They didn't know that when Helix was created. I built protections not just into the code, but into the contracts. Redundancies, triggers, ownership locks tied to federal registries and biometric authorization. They thought they fired an employee. What they actually did was start a countdown. If you've been listening for a while, do yourself a small favor and rest your eyes for a moment. Look away from the screen and focus on something far in the room. It helps more than people realize. I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? If stories like this resonate with you, subscribing quietly helps this channel keep going, and it means more than you think. Because what happens next isn't loud or dramatic at first. It's the moment the system starts turning against the people who thought they were untouchable. After the meeting, no one stopped me in the hallway. That was the part that stayed with me the most. People avoided eye contact the way they do when they know something is wrong but don't want to inherit the consequences. The same executives who had once called me indispensable now pretended their phones were urgent. Silence followed me to the elevator, where my badge still worked, another oversight born of arrogance. I didn't rush. Rushing looks like panic. I rode up to my office and shut the door behind me. 19 years doesn't leave quietly. The room looked exactly the same as it had that morning. 3 monitors still running diagnostic loops. A whiteboard filled with diagrams only 2 people in the company fully understood me. And the man who retired before nepotism replaced engineering. My jacket was still draped over the chair. Coffee, untouched, cold. They thought Helix lived on their servers. That was their first mistake. When Helix was approved for federal use, I insisted on layered compliance. Not just technical legal, contractual, procedural. Every license handshake passed through a verification chain tied to the original inventor, me. It wasn't hidden. It was documented. It was boring, which meant no one important ever read it carefully. I powered down my workstation. A final status line appeared before the screen went dark. Verification pending. External registry sync required. Good. At home that night, the city looked calm from my balcony. Lights blinked in patterns that reminded me of network traffic order pretending to be chaos. I powered up the private workstation I'd kept isolated for years. No company access, no shared credentials, just me, my keys, and the system I'd built to outlive bad leadership. Everything was still active. At 11:40 p.m. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Chase. A nervous voice whispered, "This is Martin. Legal." I leaned back. "They're announcing tomorrow, aren't they?" A pause. "Yes." Press conference. "Evan thinks the transfer cleared clean." Did anyone ask the registry for confirmation, I asked? Another pause. Longer this time. No. I ended the call without another word. They believed ownership was declared in rooms like the one I'd left that morning, glass walls, polished tables, confident voices. They never learned that real ownership is decided elsewhere, by systems that don't care who your father is. At 4:30 a.m., the registry sync completed. Across the city, Helix began asking a simple question of every system that touched it. Who are you authorized by? And for the first time, the answer wasn't Evan Caldwell. The countdown wasn't loud, it was procedural. And once it starts, it doesn't stop for apologies. At 6:15 a.m., my phone started vibrating nonstop on the kitchen counter. I didn't answer it. From my balcony, I could see the skyline waking up, office lights flickering on, traffic lines forming like arteries under stress. Somewhere inside that glass and steel optimism, systems were beginning to disagree with their new owner. Helix wasn't shutting anything down yet. That would have been crude. What it was doing instead was asking for confirmation quietly, repeatedly, everywhere at once. Banking gateways, logistics routers, government-facing compliance nodes, each request identical, each response logged, and each failure noted. By 7 o'clock a.m., internal dashboards at Caldwell Industries were lighting up with alerts no one knew how to interpret. Red wasn't danger yet. Red was uncertainty, and uncertainty is what executives fear most. I finally answered my phone. "Chase," Evan said, forcing calm into his voice. "We're seeing some irregularities, probably just a latency issue." Latency? That was almost funny. "Did your team run a full authorization sweep after the transfer?" I asked. A pause. "Legal said it wasn't necessary." "Legal doesn't write systems," I replied. "They just assume they obey." Another pause, this one sharper. By 8:10 a.m., the first external call came in. A regional bank compliance officer, polite, careful, asking why their overnight audit flagged a mismatch between patent ownership and live encryption keys. I gave them the truth. Calmly, procedurally. Helix is operating as designed. Ownership verification is pending until it clears. Certain functions will remain read-only. "What does that mean for us?" they asked. "It means nothing breaks," I said, "but nothing moves either." By 9 a.m., the press conference Evan had planned was delayed, then postponed, then quietly canceled. No announcement, no explanation, just silence where confidence had been scheduled. Inside Caldwell Industries, panic arrived in waves. Engineers were pulled into emergency calls. Legal demanded explanations from compliance. Compliance demanded answers from engineering. Everyone demanded something from a system that refused to care. At 10:30 a.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Evan's father. "Chase," he said, voice tight. "We need to discuss what's happening." "There's nothing happening," I replied. "Helix is simply verifying authorization. That's standard." "You know what I mean," he snapped. "Assets are freezing. Accounts are slowing. Partners are asking questions." "Yes," I said. "That's what verification looks like at scale." Silence stretched between us. "You built this," he finally said. "I did." I agreed, and I built it to survive people who confuse power with ownership. Outside, a news helicopter hovered near the Caldwell Tower. Inside, executives were learning a hard truth: systems don't respond to titles. They respond to authority, and authority leaves a trail. By noon, every action they took was being logged somewhere they could not edit. The exposure phase had begun. By early afternoon, the noise inside Caldwell Industries had become impossible to contain. It wasn't shouting. It was worse than that: overlapping conference calls, frantic emails marked urgent, compliance dashboards refreshing every 30 seconds like heart monitors waiting for bad news. When systems don't fail outright, people panic more, because ambiguity doesn't give you something to blame. Helix had entered its audit phase. This wasn't something Evan triggered intentionally. It was automatic. Every time ownership verification stalled, Helix expanded its review window. Not just current transactions, but historical behavior: who approved what, when delays occurred, where reports were quietly rerouted or postponed. Patterns don't lie. People do. At 1:15 p.m., I received an encrypted message from an external auditor I'd worked with years earlier. Neutral tone, no emotion. "We're seeing irregular reporting gaps tied to Helix-dependent assets." "Were you aware?" I replied with one sentence. Those gaps weren't possible under my authorization. That was all he needed. Inside Caldwell. Leadership tried to get ahead of the story. Emails flew between executives, attempting to justify the delays as technical onboarding friction. Someone drafted a memo framing the issue as a routine post-acquisition stabilization phase. Someone else suggested pushing updated talking points to partners before regulators asked questions first. They were building a narrative. Helix recorded every draft. At 2:30 p.m. Evan finally called me again. This time he didn't bother hiding the edge in his voice. "You're doing this on purpose." "I'm doing nothing." I said, "The system is enforcing its rules." "You designed those rules," he snapped. "Yes," I replied. "Because rules don't change when leadership does." He exhaled sharply. "We can settle this. Quietly. Name your terms." That was the moment I knew he didn't understand what was happening. "This isn't a negotiation," I said. "It's an audit." By mid-afternoon, the personal attacks started. A rumor surfaced that I'd been difficult to manage, that I'd resisted collaboration, that Helix had been a team effort, not the product of one architect. Someone floated the idea that my dismissal was performance-related, classic deflection. The irony was almost perfect. Those messages, every accusation, every attempt to rewrite history, violated Caldwell's own internal conduct and disclosure policies. Policies Helix cross-referenced automatically during audits. Each one was flagged, logged, time-stamped. At 4:40 p.m., a second call came in, this time from compliance leadership. "We need documentation from you," they said. "Your original authorization framework. Immediately. You already have it." I replied, "You just never thought it would matter." The line went quiet. By the time the markets closed, Caldwell's legal exposure had doubled. Not because of what Helix froze, but because of how leadership reacted once pressure appeared. Panic makes people sloppy. Sloppiness leaves evidence. That night, I watched the city lights again, steady and indifferent. They had tried to take control by force. Instead, they had triggered a system that only responds to truth. And the deeper the audit went, the clearer one thing became. The problem wasn't the transfer. It was everything they'd been hiding before it. By the next morning, Caldwell Industries wasn't trying to fix the problem anymore. They were trying to contain me. The first move was subtle. My access to shared archives materials that had always remained public-facing was suddenly restricted. Old project references vanished from internal knowledge bases. Even my name was quietly removed from historical documentation, replaced with vague phrases like core development team and legacy contributors. It was petty and revealing. At 9:20 a.m., a former engineer texted me a screenshot, an internal message from Evan himself. "Do not communicate with Chase Warren. Any outreach must go through legal." I smiled when I read it. Isolation is what people attempt when they realize they've lost control of the narrative. By late morning, the retaliation became louder. A formal statement circulated to partners claiming the audit was triggered by incomplete documentation left by a departing employee. My departure, they implied, was the cause of instability, not the theft. They were rewriting cause and effect. Helix noticed. Every external claim was compared against internal records. Every statement against logged behavior. The mismatch score climbed steadily, like pressure in a sealed container. At 11:50 a.m., I received a call from a federal compliance liaison. Calm voice, measured pace. "Mr. Warren, we're seeing discrepancies between public disclosures and internal authorization logs tied to Helix. We need clarification. I can provide full documentation." I said, "Unedited, time-stamped. We'd appreciate that." That was the moment the situation crossed from corporate damage control into regulatory consequence inside Caldwell. Evan panicked. He left me a voicemail, angry, rushed, careless. "You think you're clever," he said, "but you're hurting people who had nothing to do with this. Employees, families. You want to be responsible for that." I deleted it without replying. Because responsibility has a definition, and it doesn't include covering up fraud. That afternoon, Caldwell's legal team tried a different tactic. A cease and desist letter arrived by courier, accusing me of system interference, breach of loyalty, and intentional disruption of operations. They had made a mistake. The letter referenced internal system behavior Helix had logged under unauthorized override attempts, information they could only know if someone had tried and failed to bypass safeguards. I forwarded the letter, unchanged, to the compliance liaison. With a short note, This may help your timeline. At 3:40 p.m., Caldwell's stock dipped sharply. Not a crash yet, just enough to attract analysts. Analysts ask questions. Questions create trails. By evening, partners began pausing contracts voluntarily, not because systems were down, but because uncertainty had entered the room. That's how trust erodes, quietly, procedurally. I didn't celebrate. I watched. Because when people stop trying to fix mistakes and start attacking the person who exposed them, it means the real collapse hasn't happened yet. It means they're about to make it worse. The real damage didn't begin with headlines. It began when the money stopped moving. At 8:30 a.m., Caldwell's treasury team noticed something small but alarming. Routine interbank transfers were taking longer than usual, not failing, just waiting, pending verification, held for review. Words that make financial officers sit up straight. By 9:00 a.m., the delays spread. Payroll clearinghouses flagged Helix-linked encryption keys as temporarily restricted, vendor payments queued instead of settling. International partners received polite system notices advising patience while authorization was confirmed. Nothing crashed, nothing exploded, but nothing progressed. Inside Caldwell, executives flooded conference rooms, convinced this was a liquidity issue. It wasn't. The funds were there, the systems were intact. What they lacked was permission. Helix had reached its second safeguard license enforcement. Every active license was valid only under confirmed ownership. When verification failed, Helix didn't revoke access outright, it narrowed it. Transactions could be reviewed but not finalized. Read-only authority, applied at scale. That distinction mattered because it meant no one could accuse me of sabotage. The system was operating exactly as licensed. At 10:15 a.m., Evan called again. This time, he didn't bother with accusations. "Tell me how to undo this." "You can't," I said. "You never had the authority to begin with. You're freezing assets," he snapped. "No," I corrected him. "Your lack of authorization is—" Silence followed. Then a quieter question. "What do you want?" I answered honestly. "I want the record corrected publicly, and I want the licenses returned to compliance." "That would destroy us," he said. I looked out at the street below, people heading to work. Unaware, a billion-dollar company was quietly suffocating above them. "You already did that," I replied. "I just stopped pretending otherwise." By midday, regulators stepped in not aggressively, but formally. A standard preservation notice was issued. Financial movements tied to Helix-dependent contracts were flagged for review. Caldwell's credit partners began reassessing exposure. The phrase "temporary suspension" appeared in internal emails. That phrase terrifies boards. At 1:40 p.m., Caldwell's directors convened an emergency session without Evan present. I knew because two board members called me separately within minutes of each other. Same question, different voices. "How bad is this?" I gave them the same answer. "It's proportional." By late afternoon, rumors leaked, not from me, from analysts who noticed abnormal settlement behavior. Stock volatility spiked. Trading desks adjusted positions defensively. Confidence, once shaken, does not return quickly. That evening, Evan's father resigned. No announcement, no speech, just a quiet filing citing personal reasons. The board needed a firewall. He was it. As the sun set, Helix completed its final synchronization. Licenses reverted to compliant state. Ownership chased Warren. The money didn't move that day. And when money pauses, power follows. The morning after the resignation, the building felt different. Not empty, just cautious. By 9:00 a.m., Caldwell Industries issued its first revised statement. The language was careful, scrubbed of confidence. Words like review, clarification, and temporary adjustment replaced ownership and integration. Markets don't miss those changes. Neither do regulators. Helix didn't need to do anything new. The damage was already self-propagating. Without confirmed authorization, Caldwell couldn't certify compliance on several active contracts. That didn't trigger penalties immediately, but it did trigger pause clauses. Procurement officers hate pauses. They invite scrutiny. Scrutiny invites audits. Audits invite truth. By late morning, 3 major partners requested written assurance of intellectual property rights. Caldwell's legal team couldn't provide it, not because they lacked documents, but because every document pointed back to me. The board finally called. Not Evan, not legal. The chair. "We'd like to resolve this," he said, professionally. "I agree," I replied. "That's all I've wanted." They asked me to join a call that afternoon. No cameras, no posturing, just tired voices and people who understood too late that systems remember what people try to forget. They offered reinstatement, then a title, then equity. I declined all of it. I'm not interested in returning. I said, I'm interested in accuracy. Silence followed. What does that look like to you? The chair asked. It looks like a public correction, I said. Patent ownership restored, licensing acknowledged, and a clear statement that my termination was improper. They hesitated. That hesitation cost them, because at 2:20 p.m., a federal inquiry notice became public. Routine language, serious implications. Markets reacted immediately. By the close of trading, Caldwell's valuation had dropped nearly 40%, not from a crash but from doubt. Doubt spreads faster than panic. Evan called me once more that evening. No anger this time. You could have stopped this, he said quietly. I did, I replied. I stopped it from getting worse than it needed to be. You ruined everything, he said. I thought about the engineers who stayed late, the systems held together with patience and integrity. The work done quietly, without applause. No, I said. I corrected the record. He hung up. The next day, the board released a revised statement, ownership clarified, licenses acknowledged, my name restored properly to the patent registry. It wasn't an apology. It was enough by the end of the week. Evan stepped down, officially to pursue other opportunities, unofficially. No one wanted him near compliance again. I watched the announcement from my kitchen, coffee cooling on the counter. The collapse didn't come with sirens or headlines screaming revenge. It came with footnotes, filings, corrections. That's how systems end, not with drama, but with documentation. And documentation always wins. When the statements were corrected and the filings amended, the noise faded faster than I expected. That's the strange thing about corporate collapse once the paperwork settles. Everyone pretends it was inevitable. Analysts rewrite their notes. Commentators say the warning signs were obvious. People who stayed silent begin speaking in hindsight. I didn't correct them. By 9:30 a.m., my inbox filled with messages that all sounded the same. Former colleagues, industry contacts, firms that had once deferred to Caldwell's confidence, now asking if I'd consider advising them. Quietly, discreetly. On my terms, I ignored most of them. What mattered was what happened next inside the systems. Helix, fully restored under my authorization, began revalidating external dependencies. Partners who had paused contracts restarted them carefully, one by one. The work resumed without fanfare, the way serious work always does. No press releases, no victory laps, just function. At 11:40 a.m., the compliance liaison called again, not for clarification this time. For what it's worth, she said. Your documentation was unusually thorough. That's what integrity looks like in code, I replied. She paused. It's rare. That afternoon, I walked past the old Caldwell building, not inside, just past it. The lobby screens were dark. Temporary signage taped where polished branding used to be. A few employees lingered outside, waiting for rides or updates, faces caught between relief and loss. I felt neither. What I felt was distance. Distance from a place that had slowly replaced craftsmanship with entitlement. Distance from rooms where confidence mattered more than competence. Distance from people who mistook inheritance for innovation. At 3:20 p.m., a federal notice finalized the license reversion, plain language, no emotion. Authorized owner Chase Warren. That line mattered more than any apology. In the weeks that followed, Caldwell downsized, then restructured, then disappeared into a holding shell. No dramatic bankruptcy, just attrition. Contracts expired, talent left, trust never returned. I didn't watch closely. I was busy rebuilding this time without shortcuts. By 5:00 p.m. one evening, I signed the first new licensing agreement under my own name. Smaller scale, tighter terms, clear accountability. The kind of structure that doesn't need reminders to behave. The difference wasn't power. It was alignment. People often ask if I regret how far it went. If there was a moment I would have stepped in sooner, the truth is, I did step in. Early, quietly, in the only language systems understand, rules, ownership, verification. When those fail, nothing else matters. The collapse wasn't revenge, it was resolution. And resolution doesn't celebrate, it closes the file, logs the outcome, and moves forward. Months later, people began asking the wrong question. They didn't ask how the system failed. They asked how long I had been planning it. The assumption amused me more than it offended me. There was no master plan, no hidden countdown running in the background of my life. What existed instead was something far less dramatic and far more dangerous to people like Evan: preparation. When you build something that matters, you protect it, not out of paranoia, but out of respect for the work itself. Helix wasn't a weapon, it was a standard. And standards don't bend for titles. At 10:20 a.m. one morning, I sat across from a procurement officer reviewing a new proposal. He flipped through the documentation slowly, carefully. "This is thorough," he said. Looking up, "Most teams don't think this far ahead. I've seen what happens when they don't." I replied. He nodded. That was enough. The industry moved on quickly. It always does. Caldwell became a case study in closed-door meetings never cited publicly, but frequently referenced. A cautionary example whispered between compliance teams and board advisors. Don't rush ownership. Verify the chain. Ask who actually built it. Evan's name disappeared from conversations entirely. That's the real punishment in corporate spaces, not disgrace, but irrelevance. Last I heard, he'd joined a family-backed venture fund, far from anything that required signatures tied to reality. I didn't follow closely. What stayed with me were the quiet messages. Engineers who wrote to say they'd learned something. Legal associates who admitted they'd started reading the fine print again. One junior architect who said he'd added his own safeguards not to control outcomes, but to protect truth. That message mattered more than headlines ever could. At 4:15 p.m., I closed the final outstanding issue related to Helix's transition. The registry confirmed stability, the audit trail sealed, no open flags, no unresolved discrepancies. The file closed cleanly. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the wall, not at charts or projections, but at the simple list I keep there. Principles, not goals. Build it right, protect it quietly, let systems speak. People often mistake calm for weakness. They mistake silence for surrender. And they mistake compliance for bureaucracy instead of what it really is, a memory that never forgets. Caldwell didn't collapse because I acted. It collapsed because it ignored reality long enough to believe it could rewrite it. I didn't teach them a lesson. I let the system do what it was always designed to do. And that's the part no one wants to admit. Justice doesn't need anger. It only needs structure, in the end. The silence returned, not the kind that follows fear or avoidance, but the kind that comes after something has been settled properly. No pending reviews, no unanswered questions. Just systems doing what they were built to do, without interference. I moved into a smaller office a few weeks later. Fewer screens, more windows, the kind of place where work happens because it needs to, not because someone is watching. On the door, a simple nameplate: Warren Systems. No slogans, no promises, just accountability. At 9:00 a.m. on my first official day there, I powered on Helix under its new structure. Same architecture, same principles, different environment. It responded instantly, clean and precise, like something relieved to finally be where it belonged. That was the thing people never understood. Helix was never loyal to a company. It was loyal to truth. I spent the following months rebuilding carefully. Not fast, not loud, every contract clear, every license traceable, every approval earned. Clients noticed, not because I advertised, but because the system spoke for itself. Trust doesn't need marketing. It needs consistency. One afternoon, a young engineer asked me why I didn't fight harder in that first meeting, why I didn't argue, demand, threaten. I told him the truth. When someone believes they've already won, I said, they stop checking the rules. That's when structure matters most. Caldwell thought they took something from me that day, a title, an office, a patent. What they never touched was the foundation. You can't steal what you don't understand. You can't own what you didn't build. At 4:30 p.m. on a quiet Friday, I received a final notice from the registry. Lifetime attribution confirmed. No disputes remaining, no appeals pending. I closed the file and shut down the screen. Outside, the city moved the way it always had. People heading home, lights turning on, systems humming invisibly beneath everyday life, doing their jobs without applause. That's how real work survives, not through recognition, through resilience. Looking back, I don't think of what was taken. I think of what remained untouched: the discipline to build carefully, the patience to wait, the confidence to let truth surface on its own timeline. Justice didn't arrive with noise or spectacle. It arrived as alignment. And alignment, once restored, doesn't need defending. It simply continues. I didn't walk away from this story feeling victorious. I walked away feeling grounded. The lesson wasn't about revenge or proving someone wrong. It was about understanding that real strength is built long before conflict appears. When you do your work with care, protect what matters, and stay honest even when it's inconvenient, you don't need to panic when things turn against you. You already know who you are. As you listened, how did this story make you feel? Was there a moment, a line, or a quiet detail that stayed with you after it ended? And where are you listening from right now? What place in the world are you hearing this story? I'd genuinely love to read your thoughts in the comments. If this story resonated, a like or a share helps it reach someone who might need it today. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, subscribing is a simple way to stay connected.